So if you're curious about how to diagram a system landscape for the Salesforce CTA Review Board, you've come to the right place. My name is Svet Voloshin, Lucid CTA, and this whole video is dedicated to system landscape. This is an essential diagram to help you pass the review board and earn the coveted CTA credential. There are many ways to create a system landscape, but this is the way that worked well for me, and I would like to share what I've learned during my journey to CTA. Here are some examples. So you may be wondering what makes for a good system landscape and what doesn't. So looking at this right here, I'm just wondering, would this actually work? Well, I suppose it could, because it does show where Salesforce is and some of these other systems. It even shows the ESB and ETL, that will be the middleware and so on. So problem is it's on a whiteboard. And this may have worked in the past, but for the modern review boards, it's just not going to cut it. Why? Because it's supposed to be digital and there are no hand-drawn artifacts that are allowed anymore. So let's take a look at another version over here. So this is actually one of mine. So this is from about 3 years ago, and I was just practicing system landscape, and this particular version was made entirely in Google Slide. You could also do the same thing in PowerPoint, but then again, this was my way of doing things back then, and it took quite a bit longer than you think. So nevertheless, this could potentially work today, but this is not what I would recommend for one simple reason, that this is not the most efficient way to do it. Now, believe it or not, I evolved from this to this because it was faster. And also, I was able to use a template. So when I was using a template, so things seemed to go quite a bit faster. But if I wanted to erase something, then it would leave marks such as this, and it just didn't look clean at all. Here's another example of why this doesn't look good. And not to mention that there's handwriting involved, and some people can read it well, and some people can't. So this is what I ended up with. And this is exactly the kind of landscape that I would recommend that you actually create for your CTA review board, because I was able to pass, obviously not with this very same exact system landscape, but it was arranged in this particular fashion. Let me tell you how this all comes together. So first, I'm going to show you the anatomy of the system landscape, and then we can go from there. So this is actually from one of my favorite mocks called United Bank. So as you can see, there's a lot going on right here. And this particular diagram I was able to create for the data and security retake. It's important to have a good landscape to show the various parts of the security, but this is basically a full landscape diagram that you'll be able to create for the full exam as well. So let's dive in. So over here are some of the main elements. So we've got Salesforce itself. So that's going to be the largest triangle. As you can see, I'm pointing out that this is my domain. That's essential to show that there's going to be a SAML 2.0 authentication, and we'll be using deep links. So without my domain, the deep links just simply will not work. So furthermore, we've got the various clouds that we're going to write on the left-hand side. So we got the Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, Voice, CRM Analytics, Salesforce Service, and Schedulers. So the way that I usually do it is I would put all the Salesforce features on the left-hand side, and the various other systems and apps, mostly apps, they're going to go on the right-hand side. So over here, we also have the customer community and the partner community on the right. So I put the customer community on the left because it's just easier for me to remember that I'm going to put all the social sign-on on the left, identity management, and so on and so forth. So speaking of all the other ancillary systems, as you can see, I have my firewall over here that goes across the screen. And that's very important for me personally. I found this very, very useful to show that there's a clear demarcation between the systems that are in the cloud and the systems that are on-premise. And then we also have some of these hybrid systems, such as an ESB, that goes right directly on top of the firewall. But if you want to keep it above the firewall, below firewall, it's not really going to make a difference. The ETL that I always put below the firewall, and that's basically something that was recommended by one of my really good friends who's been now a long time CTA. Okay, what else do we have over here? So coming back to the customer community. So we know that customers are going to be signing in primarily using the social sign-on, and that could be Facebook, that could be Google, that could be other types of systems. So X, formerly known as Twitter, and I will put OIDC, OpenID Connect. That would be the flow that I will be using. It's important to also put the browser off to the side, because if you're not going to be creating the various identity flows, at least you have a browser, so you can use that to point to the various systems. So the user, for instance, uses the browser and then tries to access the service provider and then goes to the identity provider and so on and so forth. That's the reason for the browser. We have the mobile publisher over here that's going to be using a Pixie flow. So in the actual name of the flow, of course, is different. However, on the board, you don't have a whole lot of time, so you can see Pixie. So that is something that we will cover in a later video, but Pixie will be sufficient for your purposes. And of course, mobile publisher is really meant for external users, not for internal users. That's why I have it on the top, and that goes directly to the customer community. So over here, we have a website. And the website goes to show that the external users will be still interacting with the website, but it will be further enhanced by the customer community. So for instance, the various FAQs, for instance, will move from the website and they will go onto the customer community. And then we can style the customer community to, well, also known as Experience Cloud. However, I'm kind of old school when it comes to this. And so we can style the rest of the Experience Cloud to look sort of like the website. For partner community, that we'll just put on the right-hand side, and that'll be kind of like an extension of the story. So we've got, of course, some of these point-to-point connections, such as the Service Cloud Voice that runs on AWS, and the connector that sits between Salesforce and Service Cloud Voice would be, of course, Amazon Connect. So that's going to be right to the side over there. Perhaps you will be using other systems, so that would also go on the side. In this particular mock, we're using Service Cloud Voice. And whenever you can, try to shorten the various names, because it's going to save you time as well. Okay, so moving right along. Just to dive right here below the firewall, I already mentioned the ESB and the ETL. You're always going to have those. So it's important to explain what the difference is between the two and when you would use the ESB and when you would use the ETL. So of course, ESB is for orchestration of various integrations. That's called the Enterprise Service Bus. And over here, you will show that you will basically be relying on mutual TLS, transport layer security, to provide security between Salesforce and ESB, and job-bearer token flow to secure the connection between ESB. Over here on the left, we will have an ETL, so that's extract, transform, load, to be able to handle extremely large data volumes, to move data back and forth, mostly in batch data sync integration pattern. And we'll also be using MTLS and job-bearer token flow, but we're just basically adding right here bulk API 2.0, which we're not using with the ESB. So here's the thing. I would also very much recommend that whenever you're introducing a new system, you just add the word new to it. Same for existing systems that you just want to retain. So you just put the retain, and of course the other ones, typically you put them at the bottom, and you will put retire, and just so that it's absolutely clear, you just put the retire and various access next to it. Some people like to use color, but that takes extra time. So if you are so quick that you're able to, create various colors, then more power to you. For me, if I run out of time and I don't have the time to use the various colors, so I just put the X's, and it's just enough to use the text to clearly say what you're doing. So this is something I was practicing to do in an hour and a half, and I still was able to create this full diagrams as well as on the board itself. And I did pass the 2-section retake, so for which you do get a full exam, full scenario that is, and you only have an hour and a half to do it, as opposed to the 3 hours. So I do know that it actually works. Okay, so coming back to the various middleware, you're going to be using the ETL to offload some of the data to the data warehouse. So we're putting in DW over here, and Oracle DW is just something specific to this particular mock. And so, and as well as ESB is necessary so that we can virtualize this data in Salesforce, and therefore I'm putting the way to virtualize it is using Salesforce Connect. Pretty standard connection. That's something that you can do within Salesforce. Now over here, this is definitely going to vary quite a bit. So depending on the systems that are already being used in this particular scenario, such as core banking system and the various legacy CRMs, old Salesforce, and so on. So it doesn't really matter I would say it doesn't really matter which APIs you're going to be using if you know for sure which API the system offers, and that should be in the scenario already. Then you can put the SOAP API, and then there's some kind of messaging API as well. Now, if it's not clear from the scenario which particular API the system uses, then it just pick a REST. REST will be a lot easier to implement. It's faster, and then you can also explain it a lot easier than using SOAP. So over here, we actually have something specific. So there's a legacy integration between the core banking systems and various government systems. There's no need to reinvent the wheel or this connection. So what we're going to do is just point out that there's a legacy integration, and you don't have to go into too much detail beyond that. So all that you're really responsible for is Salesforce itself, because this is a Salesforce exam, and how Salesforce, of course, interacts with the middleware that you're introducing, and anything beyond the middleware you're assuming that the middleware will support, and the various APIs are going to be also supported by that middleware. So the final thing is we do have a file server, and so in this case this is perhaps a virtualization, or we're using some sort of a Canvas type integration, and so that's why it's point-to-point. Other than that, most of the time it's also going to go through ESB, and if it also has files, perhaps you can just connect it directly to the ETL like so. So it is possible to actually move these connections as you're solving the scenario, and if you even are brave enough, you can do this while you're presenting on the actual board. Okay, so last but by any means not least, let's focus a little bit on the identity management side. So I prefer to use Okta because I know Okta reasonably well and what it does. I'm also introducing Okta. This is not something they had before. So we are showing that, of course, they have two LDAPs. Perhaps one is for old external users, and the other one's for internal users. So we're going to prioritize the internal users, of course, and so we'll keep that LDAP. Well, actually, in this case, I misspoke. This is for the third-party agents, so there's no need to change that. And for internal users, we're going to be keeping Active Directory. Now, for external users, we'll assume that they will be living in Salesforce in this particular case. So Okta is going to orchestrate the identity management for us, and we're showing that this is going to be a bidirectional SAML 2.0 situation where Okta is going to facilitate the user interaction, shall we say, and user login using a single sign-on. And so that's why there's SAML 2.0. You could put these endpoints over here with the various arrows to show that it's bidirectional, but to save time, it's enough to just leave it the way it is. SCIM 2.0 is what you're using to provision and deprovision users. The reason that this is a separate arrow is because it is going always in one direction. So you're going from Okta to provision the users into Salesforce, And as you know, you cannot delete users from Salesforce. To deprovision, what you end up doing is just basically you deactivate the user in Salesforce. And again, the command comes from Okta. That is basically your system landscape and its anatomy. Let me say a few words about the various shapes. So these shapes are something that I came up with for my own purposes. You don't have to necessarily use these shapes. You can end up using whatever you want. Most people just go with rectangles. But for me, it was easier to just remember what I needed to keep, what I needed to add. And if certain shape was missing from the actual canvas, then I knew I missed or forgot something. So this was a very easy way for me to place the shapes always in the same spots. And of course, what varied were these various additional systems, but you will always have Salesforce, right? Most of the time, you're going to have customer community. In fact, I haven't seen a scenario without customer community. Partner community is not necessarily happening all the time, but it's quite common. So I put that on the right-hand side. Mobile publisher, almost always. So I'm going to use this particular shape for mobile publisher. Social sign-on, also almost always. And you will have the identity management system. Either you're retaining the one that's there, or most of the time you're going to be actually introducing a whole new one. And I'm using Okta. Now you can easily substitute it with Azure AD or a Ping. And so in this case, this is this type of a shape over here, which usually in flowchart shapes, it means display. So speaking of the various shapes, let's take a look at what's available. So when you open Lucidchart on the board, you're going to get the default shapes. So it's enough to just use this palette over here. So this is these are the shapes for the flowchart. And what you end up doing is basically just using them, and you don't have to worry about selecting others and waste time on that. So for me, of course, the Active Directory LDAP, they're in this diamond shape, which is a decision element, generally known as decision element. And I don't even remember basically all of the names for the various flowchart shapes. If I wanted to, I can just hover over here and it'll tell me like this is manual operation. Does not matter. This is something that I always use for the ETL. And for the various data warehouses, I would be using this to say that there's going to be a hard disk, for instance. Or you can also use a database shape. That's completely up to you. Okay, so that's the reason for Oracle. Or for the data warehouse rather. And the ESB is always going to be a hexagon. So that's basically my rationale for using these various shapes. It's not that they mean something special in the grand scheme of things. It's just something that I prefer to use and I prefer to do, and this works for me really, really well. So there you go. This is the anatomy of the system landscape, and I will also in a separate video show you how to make the system landscape really, really fast. Now that you've made it to the end of this video, I'd like to thank you for watching. I hope this content has been useful to you. I really enjoy being an architect, and what I enjoy even more is sharing my experience with others who may find it helpful, which is why I created this channel. I intend to keep this content free and accessible to everyone. Please share this and my other videos with others, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what other CTA related content you would like to see, and I will see you on the other side of your comfort zone.